Happy Easter Day. These are my reflections on the stories that come out of the scriptures and circle around this resurrection morning. Resurrection is close to home. Rudy was in a hospital bed. He was dying. His body was strong even after the wreckage of his illness and he had slipped in and out of wakefulness and sleep. He was there and he was somewhere else. I sat with Frida, his wife. She told me that he would wake up and stare up towards the ceiling and listen and talk. Old friends and family were coming to visit him. The dead coming to encourage and support the dying. He would tell her about the conversations after his visitors left. He was weak, but he was cogent. They came, said Frida, those longest dead, working onwards to the most newly deceased. They took from him his fear, and Frida's too. They had great faith. I met Frida and Rudy when Lucy and I ministered in a vibrant little church in Kapuskasing, Northern Ontario. Frida and Rudy were Eastern European refugees who had walked out of Poland after everything collapsed at the end of World War II. They walked for miles, hundreds of miles, in brutal cold. Many gave up and died beside the road. They didn't know where or when it would all end, but they were determined not to die. They walked to the end of the dry land and found a way to come to Canada. It was not a short flight, but a winter sea crossing full of fear and seasickness, arriving as so many did in the hope of peace, a chance to start, even in a small way, a better life. Canada sent many of the Eastern Europeans up to Northern Ontario. They dropped them off, simply stopping in the forest at a lot assigned to them. They got down from the train. They were given enough food. They were given a piece of land, an axe, a saw, a hammer, a bag of nails, sacks of flour, sugar and other things. Enough just for survival. They cut saplings to build quickly before winter set in. The next year, they pulled and straightened the nails, cut logs, and built a cabin. They cleared and farmed to grow enough food to survive. Many years later, with children, they made it into town. The same nails built their first house of boardwood with a wood stove, plumbing, and windows of glass. They found work. They joined the Anglican Church, bullied the clergy, and took them home to feed them up. No one was without food in that church. They would not hear of it. They had trusted. They had nearly died. They had been saved. They chose to be trustworthy. Rudy and Frida's friends and family had kept them alive in life, and as life ended, they rose again for him to take Rudy's fear away. His visitors, he told Frida, assured him of life beyond, life in God. He died full of peace and faith, a peace Frida shared. I'm going to tell you another story now. And this is an old story called The Harrowing of Hell. You're going to have to do a little bit of cutting and pasting in your heads to join this together with the gospel stories, but I'm confident you can do it. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, Satan summoned his two chief stewards, death and hell. He told them, "Jesus will soon be in our hands." Death said, "No one has ever got loose from my grip, And hell said, "And no one has ever got out of my prison." They cackled with demonic glee. Later that day, Jesus' body was placed in a tomb, and when all was quiet, seeping up through the cracks in the rock out of the dirt came 1,000 little demons who wrapped Jesus' lifeless soul in tight, strong ropes and dragged him down into hell. When he was brought into the great subterranean chamber of hell, they gathered together to scream and whoop and chatter their teeth at his lifeless body. Still they were afraid of him. Satan ordered that he be taken to the deepest part of hell and placed in a cave and sealed with tons of rock and guarded. Then in hell, a great party began. It went on for 2 entire days. On the 3rd day, as the demons woke up, hungover and the worse for wear, hell was very silent. Too silent. Except deep in the rock, at the sealed entrance to Jesus' tomb, there was an almost inaudible hissing sound. A white vapour like steam was coming up out of the cracks and the gaps and the rubble, locking Jesus in. The vapour seemed to hold a slight, gentle light. Up through the tunnels and crevices the vapour crept as it went. As the vapour entered the lowest level of the dungeons, the locks broke open and the barred doors silently swung. The souls of the righteous slipped joyfully out and began to rise up with the vapour, upwards, level by level, the shining mist silently spreading, doors and cages falling open, a growing host of the imprisoned and lost swept ever upwards. Meanwhile, death and hell were groggily awakening. "What's that smell?" said hell. "Ain't supposed to smell fresh up here?" Death opened a bleary eye and complained, "Ain't supposed to be bright neither. What's up? I don't like this." And almost as the words fell from their mouths, a brightness of light filled the cavern and air, smelling of spring freshness and new grass. All around them echoed a terrible rattling of locks and chains and oak doors squeaking open. Hell looked at Death with fear in his eyes. "We got to tell the boss." And off they fled to find Satan. Banging on the door, they heard Satan's voice in anger. "Stop that noise before I turn you to stone. I'm having my first sleep since that Mary gave birth to him." "But boss," they shouted. "We think he might have broken out." "What? Out? Him?" Satan shouted in utter rage and fear. The caverns shook, as did hell and death. No sooner had Satan opened his door to see what was going on than a blinding white light filled everywhere. It was coming from one point and it was getting closer to them. Jesus, radiant and fearless, faced them. "Ah!" they all said together. "I'm letting everybody go," said Jesus, in a voice both calm and filled with authority. Everyone cringed. "All these behind me," said Jesus, "I have set free. But there are others who need to be released. I need their keys. In fact," said Jesus, reaching towards hell's belt, lifting off his huge ring of keys, "in fact, I'll just take all of them. No longer will the children of my Father be in your power. They will all follow me upwards, out of death, and none shall block their way." With that, Jesus walked upwards. Doors fell open as he passed. Light filled darkness wherever he looked, and finally the door of the tomb in which his earthly body lay swung out and open and fell to the ground. He watched as Mary looked for his body, and then he called her name, Mary. He called her name as he will call one day mine, and one day yours. When his visitors had all helped Rudy depart from this life, Jesus came, took his hand too, and led him into eternal life. The resurrection of Jesus is not an event with a date. It is an eternal truth of God's love shown on that Sunday morning, a truth that death cannot destroy. Happy Resurrection Sunday.